Good morning. Thank you.
It is.
I have a question. Learned a lot about energy, and through that process learned channeling, and through that process learned about people passing over, coming and speaking. And in all that learning, there were several people I had who were teaching me that talked about protection. And
well, that's because you were not receiving them in their vortex form. You were receiving the thought form of that which lingered once they'd made their transition. Because no one who has reemerged into non-physical ever speaks of protection.
And even doing energy work, they say, I was told to protect myself. I don't believe that I need to. I don't believe that I need to shield myself from negative energies.
Well, because that's a flawed premise. It implies that there is assertion, and that something other than that which you want could jump into your experience. But it could also be, in a softer way of understanding, it could mean, and there could be distortion in the receiving of it. It could mean get into the vortex first and then receive. In other words, because when you think about it, being able to translate energy is a little bit like being able to read a book. Once you learn to read, you can read anything. But there are things that are uplifting to read and things that are not uplifting to read. There are things that are valuable and helpful to you to read, and there are things that are not valuable and helpful for you to read. So when you are deciphering or reading energy, all that means is that you're tuning into the energy and focused there long enough that you're able to translate it. So when you recognize that every thought that has ever been thought still exists, and that by law of attraction, who is the gatherer of the thoughts, in other words, the manager of the thoughts, just like the radio signals, law of attraction causes this coalescing of thoughts so that there are rivers and streams of thoughts. So when you tap in to a stream of thought, often it's powerful because you know it goes far beyond what you've been contemplating, but you've tapped into it, and so it feels like a reality. But the question is, it feels like it's being projected from somewhere and you're the receiver of it. Esther had a little bit of this in the beginning when she would focus upon something and she would begin receiving, and then she would say to us, Abraham, this doesn't really square with other things that I've heard from you. And we say, it's because you're not getting that from us, but you're picking up energy. In other words, you're picking up the thought and translating it. It's like reading the book. But you can tell by the way you feel. And so our encouragement to Esther was get into alignment and then receive. That's why we don't encourage people to practice channeling. We encourage them to get into the vortex, and if it is something that's in their vortex that they have wanted to do, it will find its way in a path of least resistance, you see. But there are a lot of people who are pushing it and trying to make it happen. Some are parroting us. There have been several that Esther has asked us, is this person authentically receiving? And we say, no, they're channeling your website because it is that sort of thing that is happening. But everyone has the ability to tap into this energy.
Absolutely.
And so your questions are wonderful, because as you tap into that energy in that place of allowing and aligning, you can tell by the way you feel. You can tell by the love of it. You can tell by the feel of it. You can tell by the power of it. You can tell by the consistency of it, you see. You can tell. So now let's talk about someone who has made their transition. So when you talk to Aunt Nellie and she tells you that she's worried about you not finding the money she married in the backyard, that she buried, or that she's worried about you in some way, you are not tapping in to where she is now. You're tapping in to that which she was, which is still available. In other words, there is this thought form that surrounds you that remains for some time. The more well-known you are, the more people who have focused upon you, the more vivid that thought form is, and the more easily translatable it is, you see. And so we want to say to all of you, don't let this be, it isn't unsettling to you, is it? To realize that the energy is there. There are all kinds of energies that are there. You just want to bring yourself to the highest frequency. And how do you know you have? Because you feel really, really good before you start the translation process, you see. And a lot of people, it's interesting, when you begin this process of trying to soothe people who are suffering from their dearly departed, they elicit from you, they're eliciting from you soothing, and there is nothing wrong with giving it to them. We just want you to understand that in what you are receiving, that you are sort of bridging what was and what is. And
well, there are if that happens, it's when someone has a message for me to give to somebody. It's not because I ask for it or I'm trying to help them.
Yes,
it just happens.
But the message is always one of upliftment when it is coming from where they now are. It is never a message of guardedness or protection, ever, you see. You left all of that on your physical trail when you made your transition into non-physical, every bit of it. That is a figment of man's imagination.
When you transition, I believe it can happen either instantly or take a long time for someone to be able to come back and communicate with someone, because I don't think that every situation is the same. Is that true?
Well, it has to do. Every situation isn't the same, but everyone who reemerges into non-physical releases resistance immediately and is available. So the readiness is not on the part of those who have made their transition. It's the availability of those who are there to hear. And the medium through which it is coming is only a part of that. In other words, the people who are summoning through you play a large role in all of this. How they feel and what they want. In other words, you have to understand that non-physical energy is like us, reluctant to give you the manifestation that you want. In other words, source energy is not eager to play the game of distortion. You see, no matter how much humans want it, source energy is not eager to play that game of distortion.
Because it's all pure positive energy.
Precisely. So, for a little while, because you're good at what you do, for a little while, make a decision that you're going to play the general game. Don't try to get too specific. Let that energy speak through you in general terms. Now, those who are listening, they want evidence that you're connecting with them. In other words,
people in physical form.
The people in physical form, they want evidence, and so you pull it right out of their mind and give it to them.
Well, actually, I was told information and gave it to somebody, and they wanted a word, and I'm not into that. Just give what I give.
But hear what we're saying. In other words, if the thought form is there, and you're translating something. We're not saying that you cannot get specific information from non-physical, and we're not saying that it isn't validating and helpful, because it is. Because one of the most magnificent things about people making their transition into non-physical is that it helps those who have not yet made their transition accept that there is something more than what's going on here. In other words, there are all kinds of wonderful things about it. It's just that there is a lot of distortion that is translated in order to soothe the suffering that later on comes back and bites them. It sort of follows the same subject that we had about religion, that we're having about religion. There are all kinds of things about religion that are soothing, and yet it's distorting. With religion, for example, with religion comes the idea of eternity or of non-physical. Comes with the idea of that which man wants to call God, and love and help, and all of that is valid. But with it also comes rules and commandments and demands and punishment that is not accurate. That's what man has put into it for his own purposes. And so when you become this pure translator of this non-physical energy, you just don't want to put the distortion in just because humans expect it. That's our point.
Absolutely.